a brilliant, free-spirited college student.
Barbara was very creative. She was always very theatrical.
I always thought she was a genius because everything came so easy to her.
Is found brutally murdered in a mountain canyon.
We could see 5 or 6 gunshot wounds.
There was some speculation that she had been sexually assaulted.
A clue left by the victim leads to surprising suspects.
He finds this note addressed to all the Mormon roommates that she was leaving to go be with her people.
Just how bad was this relationship with her roommates, and what could it cause anyone to do?
And a series of bizarre twists.
He's telling us that bullet holes were in a triangular pattern, and that's a sign of a possible Satan killing.
Somebody took her up there to the woods. This was potentially a sacrifice.
Until the evidence reveals a killer no one saw coming.
There was DNA from the soil that was underneath her body.
It was like finding a needle in a haystack, a big haystack.
It just didn't seem like somebody who would kill somebody.
It was just the biggest shock you could fathom.
Provo, Utah, a small college town in a picture-perfect mountain setting.
Provo sits in a county south of Salt Lake. It's where the Brigham Young University campus is at.
It's a very safe community. During the 1970s, Provo was definitely a place that was very low on crime, and you didn't have to worry about locking your doors at night.
That innocence is lost on a cold March afternoon in 1974, when a grisly discovery in a nearby canyon sends shockwaves through the community.
On March 11th, 1974, the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office received a telephone call from a power company worker who had started walking up from the power plant. And as he was cutting through some brush, he came across a white female with gunshot wounds to her back.
The crime scene is essentially a couple miles up what we call Big Cottonwood Canyon.
Investigators race to the canyon where the utility worker leads them to the body.
We could see 5 or 6 gunshot wounds. All of them looked to be in her back or in her arm. The shot placements looked like execution-type shots, and it looked like she had been there for a few hours at least. With the way that her body was positioned, we felt like sexual assault was part of this crime scene. Her arms were tucked up underneath her. That told us that she was in pain, that she was fearful of what was happening to her. We're looking for things like drag marks, but the ground around the body was not disturbed.
It looks like where she was is where she was killed.
Detectives are struck by an unusual detail.
Her clothes were folded neatly and piled towards the top of her head.
We suspected that the victim was probably trying to buy some time. As she was being told to undress, she was stacking her clothes in this neat pile.
More evidence is revealed when they turn the victim over.
We found some possibly .38 caliber bullets that were recovered after they had gone through the victim's body. We also picked up some soil and logged it into our evidence room.
The detectives back in the 70s, they didn't have the DNA that we have in today's crime scene investigations. They focused on all kinds of trace evidence like the soil, fibers, hairs may link the suspect to that scene.
While the body is taken to the morgue, detectives interview their only witness.
The only thing we really knew at this point was a utility worker had found this body, and we were able to clear him fairly quickly, but we didn't know who the victim was. We didn't have any other real suspects to go with at that point. We got a hold of the local media, let them know that we had a white female, Jane Doe, that we were trying to identify. Later that night, we received a telephone call from the Brigham Young University Police Department that they had received a missing person report of a white female earlier that day. The missing person in Provo matched the description of our Jane Doe.
The missing person is 22-year-old student Barbara Jean Rocky, but police need a formal identification to be sure she's also their murder victim.
We made a phone call down to a couple of the guys that were hanging out with Barbara.
Jerry Hicker is the one that filed the missing persons report. Jerry is also a student at BYU, and he was a friend of Barbara's and some of her roommates.
Edward Fisher and Jerry Hicker went to the morgue to do an identification on our Jane Doe.
Edward and Jerry confirm the murdered woman is Barbara Rocky. Police now face the difficult task of informing her family.
At the time of Barbara's murder, my parents were living in California.
My mom found out first from the police and was crying, and from then on, nothing was the same.
was just the biggest shock you could fathom. It's like what you knew of the world has just imploded.
Born in 1952, Barbara had an idyllic childhood growing up in Menlo Park, California.
Barbara was very creative. She was always very theatrical.
I always thought she was a genius because languages and music came so easy to her. Barbara was always rooting for the underdog. If somebody needed help, she would open doors for them. I mean, always doing something very sweet.
When the time came to go to college, Barbara's choice reflected a growing spiritual interest.
Barbara was always searching for a religion.
Barbara was interested in the Mormon religion. My parents were very happy for her to go to Brigham Young because they felt that she would get the safe group of friends and the good education and religion that she required.
When Barbara went off to college, she seemed up and happy and like things were going well.
Investigators asked Barbara's loved ones if they can think of anyone who might be responsible.
Since she was away at college and out of our supervision, we had no idea what she was doing. We just didn't know what kind of friends she was making.
In speaking with the family, they just had no idea on who could have done this to her.
With the family unable to provide leads, detectives hope her college friends might be able to point them in the right direction.
Ed Fisher was dating one of Barbara's roommates. When asked if he had any idea who would have done this to Barbara, he just had no idea. He felt Jerry Hicker might have more information about Barbara than he would.
Jerry Hicker is also a student at BYU, and Barbara seemed to spend lots of time with him.
Jerry described that he was just devastated that this had happened to Barbara. He knew Barbara very well.
Police asked Jerry what led him to file a missing persons report just hours before Barbara was found dead.
He said that he had gone skiing the day before, used Barbara's car to take the skis back, and then he met up with Barbara on March 11th at about 10 o'clock in the morning and gave the car keys back with plans to meet up later on to go grocery shopping. After leaving Barbara, Jerry spoke with one of Barbara's roommates, and then he went to study at the library. Later that day, Jerry and Barbara had plans to grab some food, but she didn't show up. As Jerry left the BYU campus, he walked past Barbara's house, and he didn't see Barbara's car, so he continued towards his home. And as he was passing the Park Plaza apartments and sees Barbara's car sitting in the parking lot, which was someplace that Barbara would have never parked her car.
He said that was kind of odd, why it would have been parked where it's not normally parked.
Inside the car, he finds this note that was left by Barbara. It's addressed to all the roommates that basically said that she had found her people, that she was leaving to go be with her people. I think that he looked at it as a suicide note, and so he took the note over to the roommates, and that raised enough suspicion to report her as a missing person.
In order to clear Jerry as a person of interest, detectives drilled deeper into his timeline.
Jerry gave his timeline up until that evening, and essentially once he found that letter, he came and talked to us.
Jerry reported her missing, he found the note, he was cooperating with detectives, so he really wasn't somebody that fit as a suspect.
When detectives asked Jerry about any conflicts Barbara may have had, he mentions one unexpected source.
Jerry tells investigators that the roommates and Barbara kind of have an off-again, on-again relationship.
Barbara Jean Rocky lived with 7 other women from Mormon families. Barbara sometimes liked to do things for shock value, and this is not a place people go to shock others.
There was a little bit of intimidation between Barbara and some of the girls. Jerry said that things had gotten so bad that he had tried to find Barbara another place to live.
Was it possible one of Barbara's roommates could be the culprit behind her death?
Just how bad was this relationship that Barbara Jean Rocky had with her roommates, and what could it cause anyone to do?
Coming up, detectives uncovered dark secrets.
The majority of the roommates were very religious.
He had a relationship with Barbara Jean and had been dating one of her roommates.
The love triangle could easily turn deadly when there's jealousy involved.
He had pulled a dagger on her and said he was going to stab her.
and links to a terrifying killer.
She described him as a great warlock and maybe even a devil worshiper.
There's women all over the American West that are going missing and being discovered dead.
This guy turns out to be probably the most famous, notorious serial killer of all time.
Until the evidence reveals the horrific truth.
He was not who we suspected, and so to learn that he was responsible for killing her was very surprising.
After 22-year-old college student Barbara Rocky is found shot dead, police have discovered she had clashed with her roommates and bring them in separately for questioning.
The roommates only known her since January when Barbara moved into the house and going to a predominantly Mormon school. Barbara really didn't fit that mold. She was from California and she was more of a free spirit.
She was somebody who was very opinionated and was not a conformist.
Barbara Jean Rocky's roommates say that she was kind of dating around, not necessarily saving herself from marriage, and it was generally not accepted.
The roommates were very religious. They attended church faithfully. I think Barbara would probably experiment with different religions just to expand her knowledge, and at times would do things that would maybe scare them.
Barbara Jean's roommate said she was kind of into witchcraft, so she was attracted to that lifestyle a little bit.
They didn't want to be a part of Barbara's life, so they would keep her at arm's length.
Had one of Barbara's roommates lashed out and done something unthinkable?
Being more of the typical LDS BYU student, you just wouldn't think that somebody like that could kill somebody. But until you do the leather work on it, you can't clear them.
Detectives work to verify the roommates' alibis.
Once the investigators corroborated all the stories and looked at the timelines, they were able to clear the roommates as not being somebody that had killed Barbara.
As detectives continue asking the roommates about Barbara, they learn some startling new information.
Investigators found out through the interviews of the roommates that Barbara would carry a .357 revolver pistol. Some of the roommates described Barbara as being maybe a little bit paranoid, where she would think people were following her.
In 1974, people weren't just walking around with guns the way they do today. So if a 21-year-old college kid was walking around with a .357 Magnum pistol, who was she afraid of?
Detectives get more surprises when they search Barbara's vehicle.
When the investigators looked in the rear of the vehicle and they found ammunition and targets, things that you wouldn't expect in a female BYU student's car. Did Barbara feel like she needed to have a gun? Did she practice with the gun? Was somebody after her? We weren't sure what all of that meant at that point. The car was fingerprinted, but there was just nothing of good forensic value that we could come up with at that time.
With more questions than answers, detectives turn their attention back to the note Barbara's friend Jerry had found earlier in Barbara's car.
They found a victim shot multiple times, and then someone else finds this note in her car that says she's leaving to be with her people. And what's the purpose of this?
The investigators were wondering if the note was even authored by Barbara, so they do some handwriting analysis on it and sent it out to have that done.
While detectives await results, the autopsy report comes in.
At that time, they came up with 6 bullet hole entrance wounds. The shot in the arm was probably the bullet that killed her because it went back into the chest and hit some vital organs. And the final wounds were when Barbara was turned over and on her stomach, and the entrance wounds were in her back.
Being shot in the back is a good indicator that the person is known by the assailant. He doesn't want to see their face when he kills them.
At the autopsy, the medical examiner took swabs of both her rectum and her vaginal area to try to preserve any evidence that might be there.
The autopsy report indicated no definitive evidence that she had been sexually assaulted.
With the autopsy offering no new leads, investigators turn their focus to any romantic relationships Barbara may have had.
They were talking with the roommates more about other men that may be in Barbara's life, and they came up with a guy named Richard. They knew that Barbara was very much infatuated with him. She spoke about him all the time, even called him her boyfriend.
As police focus on Richard, they make a disturbing discovery.
They had asked if Richard had ever been violent towards Barbara, and Barbara had relayed one story that Richard had pulled a dagger on her and said he was going to stab her.
This was not the only alarming story Barbara's roommates relayed to detectives.
About a month before Barbara was murdered, she reported that her gun was missing, and that raises all kinds of concerns. She reported it to campus police, and to my knowledge, she never got that gun back. A .357 revolver would have fit with the potential murder weapon that killed Barbara. She had expressed concern to her roommates that the person that had taken the gun may use that gun on her, and the roommates just kind of dismissed it. But now that Barbara was found shot to death, the roommates were concerned for themselves as well. Having that information, the investigators really wanted to find out who Richard was. At this point, all we have is Richard's first name. He's willing to maybe take a dagger and stab her.
We strongly felt that he could have been responsible for her murder.
3 days have passed since student Barbara Rocky was discovered shot dead in Big Cottonwood Canyon, and police are hunting a man named Richard, who they believe is her boyfriend.
This could be the person that killed Barbara, but all we have is Richard's first name, and so we're kind of running into a dead end.
With no way to identify their potential prime suspect, detectives catch a lucky break.
Out of the blue, a guy named Richard Finder calls into our department and tells us that he knew Barbara Rocky.
Richard Finder initiated contact, offering his services to basically try to help them solve this case.
First question we had was, is this the Richard that we've been looking for?
As investigators prepare to meet with Richard Finder, they learn everything they can about him.
We find out that he's in his 30s, and he's a self-proclaimed psychic. He lived in California. Barbara was from California, so that was one of the connections that they had. We also found out that a .357 pistol was registered to him, which is obviously the same caliber that we're looking for.
Richard Finder arrives at the sheriff's office, and detectives begin by asking him about his relationship with the 22-year-old college student.
Barbara heard Richard Finder on the radio talking about the occult. Barbara had called into the radio station. They ended up exchanging phone numbers. Barbara had gone up to see him at his hotel, and I think Barbara at one point even felt that Richard was her boyfriend. Richard claimed that it was just a spiritual relationship, that he looked at Barbara not in a physical way.
Under further questioning, Richard mentions something that gets the detectives' attention.
The place that he was staying at was very close to the mouth of the canyon where it was that Barbara Jean was found.
Detectives cut to the chase and ask Richard where he was on March 11th, the day that Barbara was killed.
He tells them that he was in Salt Lake at the time of the murder. He said that he had got up and had some breakfast, and then he went over and helped a friend do some construction work on a house all day long, and then he went back home and went to sleep on the couch.
Detectives set to work checking out Richard's alibi.
The guy that Richard Finder was staying with did confirm that Richard was with him in the evening, but he could not confirm the times that Richard told us about during the daytime.
With holes in Richard's alibi, detectives dig deeper into his claims about his relationship with Barbara.
Our investigator talked to Barbara's therapist, and she just really got the impression that Barbara was in love with Richard.
The therapist reveals another way the relationship was less innocent than Richard made it seem.
Barbara described Richard as a great warlock and maybe even a devil worshiper.
I think that the satanic and the witchcraft, it's not too far-fetched to think, okay, somebody took her up there to the woods. This was potentially a sacrifice.
When police confront Richard with his allegations, his response is even more alarming.
He's telling us that he's having these dreams and that she was shot in the back in a triangular pattern, and that's a sign of a possible Satan killing or devil worship. Richard also told us that he had a vision that the murder weapon was also thrown into water. How would he know that we didn't have the murder weapon? So that really raised a question to us. We're wondering, is this guy confessing to us? Is he telling us about our crime scene? He has all of this knowledge. Is this guy the one that killed Barbara that day?
When you start putting all of these things together, it made Richard Finder a pretty good suspect.
Despite the circumstantial evidence stacking up against him, detectives need something more concrete.
So we collect all of his weapons for ballistic tests with the projectiles that we located from Barbara's body. We received the results from the ballistics test, and they were not a match. And that pretty much blew up most of our case with Richard Finder.
Detectives pin their hopes on the results of the handwriting analysis on the note found in Barbara's vehicle.
Maybe she wrote the note under duress. Maybe she was forced to write the note.
That could be a significant clue, especially if it's determined that our victim didn't author the note. It's like someone's writing a suicide note for someone else.
The handwriting analysis came back and it showed that Barbara was the one that had written the note.
The letter itself seemed to be a valid letter to her friends, and several people said that's Barbara's handwriting.
The investigators concluded that maybe Barbara was thinking about moving home and she was just explaining that in the note. At this point, we're starting to run out of leads.
As the investigation stalls, Barbara's family is rocked by another tragedy.
My dad would call the police practically every day when nothing was coming to fruition. And he died like within a year after she died.
It killed my father. And we had so many key relatives die, still wanting to know what happened to Barbara.
Detectives never give up on the case, and a year later, in 1975, they notice a disturbing pattern of crimes.
There's women all over the American West that are going missing and being discovered dead.
College co-eds with dark hair were found murdered, and the serial killer was certainly the big topic of conversation.
A surprising arrest changes the whole course of the investigation.
In 1975, a Utah State trooper makes an arrest west of Salt Lake City.
The suspect was arrested for a kidnapping case, and some of the evidence in the vehicle definitely could have had something to do with Barbara's murder as well.
The driver's name is Ted Bundy.
This guy turns out to be probably the most famous, notorious serial killer of all time. Is he the one that killed Barbara?
A year and a half after the murder of Barbara Rockey, the investigation is sparked back into life by the arrest of notorious serial killer Ted Bundy.
More and more that police start investigating Ted Bundy, the more connections they find to missing and murdered women all over the country.
In 1974, Ted Bundy was also in the Utah area, going to school at the University of Utah.
Barbara Jean fit Ted Bundy's profile.
She was a college student, she was a brunette, and she was the age that Ted Bundy seemed to target.
Ted Bundy had a reputation of being a very charming man. You know, he was a good-looking guy and was kind of a smooth talker.
Ted Bundy would act like he was hurt and ask for some assistance from a female, and that would have fit right with the personality of Barbara. She would have helped Ted Bundy if he had approached her.
With Barbara fitting the profile of Bundy's victims, detectives connect with the FBI.
The investigators were able to get a hold of a timeline that the FBI had prepared, find out what his whereabouts were on March 11, 1974. When the investigators looked at Ted Bundy's timeline, they found that he had an ironclad alibi for that day because he was in Washington committing another murder.
With Bundy cleared, the Barbara Rockey investigation grinds to a halt.
The investigators had done everything forensically that they could. They had done all the interviews that they could. They had looked at all the suspects that they could, and the case just went cold.
Once the case was cold, we pretty much accepted that it was not going to be solved.
When a case goes cold, it definitely affects the family every bit as much, if not more, than the investigator. They just want someone to be held accountable for their daughter's death.
The case lies unsolved for 30 years, while Barbara's family yearns for answers.
The hope and the drive to crack this case someday was powered by losing so many family members that were enraged and wanted justice. So we had nothing to lose by trying.
In 2005, Barbara's loved ones make one last push for justice.
I asked Mom, I said, "Do you want me to try to open this?" And she said yes, because I need to know before I die.
I was a fairly new homicide detective, and my phone rang, and it was one of the family members saying, "Hey, my sister was killed back in 1974. Our mom's getting up in years, and she'd really like to know who killed her daughter."
The family would expect us to just do what needs to be done to solve their case, and you can't put a price tag on this level of justice.
Digging into the 30-year-old case files, detectives' attention is drawn to one suspect in particular, the self-proclaimed psychic, Richard Finder.
I was not convinced that law enforcement had closed the door all the way on Richard Finder.
I wanted to look into Richard further because the timeline to me wasn't rock solid, and I wanted to try to look more into the forensic end of it. DNA and the ballistic stuff has come a long ways since 1974. As I'm looking through each piece of evidence, I'm trying to figure out if that would have any forensic benefit to having tested.
While evidence from the original crime scene is sent to the crime lab, investigators dig deeper into Richard's version of events.
As I started looking at Richard's alibi, I spoke with some of the same people that the investigators had spoke with previously.
As we reinvestigated and re-interviewed these people, information that wasn't known back then was revealed.
What I learned was that Richard had been dating and seeing a friend of Barbara's, Janelle. But then Barbara also found that Janelle was getting closer to Richard Finder than Barbara was, and there was some animosity from what I understand regarding that.
I learned that sometime very close to the murder, Richard had left town with Janelle Bach, and Richard and Janelle became boyfriend and girlfriend, and that was kind of a blow to Barbara. That really kind of stuck out to me.
Janelle came back to Salt Lake for 3 or 4 days around the time of the homicide with Richard Finder, and they were staying at a house just west of the mouth of the canyon where Barbara was found.
Had Barbara confronted Richard about Janelle, only for the encounter to turn fatal?
Because of this relationship between Janelle and Barbara, and because Richard Finder supposedly had guns, and then because of his witchcraft and the possibility of human sacrifice, Richard Finder was up there on the list as a potential suspect.
Investigators try to bring Richard in for another interview.
Unfortunately, we found that Richard Finder had passed away.
But really, the only avenue I had was to go talk with Janelle.
Was Janelle the only living person who knew what really happened to Barbara?
I didn't see any information in the case file where Janelle Bach had really given a good interview about Richard Finder, and so that was the place that I wanted to start.
Barbara was upset that Janelle had essentially taken Richard Finder, so when they came back, there's this potential triangle and some jealousy. It placed some suspicion on Janelle.
Anytime an investigation reveals some sort of a love triangle that can easily turn deadly when there's jealousy involved, and all of a sudden, the whole thing shifts from one guy to the person that's least suspected.
3 decades after Barbara Rockey was found murdered in a Utah canyon, cold case detectives want to speak to Barbara's former roommate, Janelle, who had been dating Richard Finder, the psychic Barbara had fallen in love with.
Janelle was looked at because of this triangle and this dispute, and Richard Finder was aware that there was this jealousy.
Detectives want to know if either Richard or Janelle had the opportunity to kill Barbara.
They were back in Salt Lake for 3 or 4 days on a ski trip during the time of Barbara's demise, but they never went skiing. And they were staying at a place close to the crime scene where Barbara was found.
Janelle was able to give me a timeline that she was with Richard that day, and the hours that she wasn't coincided with the times from the initial investigation.
It was confirmed with others that she was very sick when she came up here. She didn't even leave the house, and she was being taken care of by Richard Finder during the time of the homicide and was not in that area.
Janelle Bach was able to give me enough information to make me feel that he definitely was not the killer of Barbara, and she was not a suspect any longer.
Undeterred, detectives scour through the files from 1974, looking for details the original investigators may have missed.
As I was going through the case file, Jerry Hicker's name kept popping up.
So Jerry's early role in the case was he was one of the last people to allegedly have seen Barbara Jean at about 10 o'clock in the morning.
He reported her missing, so he really wasn't somebody that they were looking at as having a role in her death.
They were really good friends. That came through in the investigation, but I wasn't satisfied about him not being a suspect.
Detectives reach out to Barbara's former roommates, asking them about Jerry.
Some of the roommates told me that, Jerry just didn't have a lot of friends, and Barbara was accepting of everybody. But Jerry just kind of latched on to Barbara, and I think Jerry had more romantic feelings for Barbara than Barbara did for him.
I think the roommates kind of looked at Jerry as basically kind of a stray pet that people were taking care of.
He just didn't seem like somebody who would kill somebody.
When investigators dig into Jerry's life after Barbara's murder, they make a disturbing discovery.
Jerry had been accused of rape in the Provo area after Barbara's murder.
When I found that Jerry was arrested for a sexual assault, I want to know, could Jerry have been the one that killed Barbara? Barbara's roommate had been away from Jerry for a long time. In the interviews, I found out that Jerry really had an obsession with guns, that he helped Barbara find the .357 that she bought. He took her out, showed her how to shoot the .357.
Jerry would always tell Barbara about how to load her firearm, leaving one of the cylinders in the revolver empty, and then looking back and seeing that Barbara was shot 5 times. Is that relevant in this case?
We actually looked at the police report, and we couldn't really determine if she had been shot 5 or 6 times. There was the opinion that it was 6, but it could have also been through the re-entries and fragments, could have been 5.
As I'm going through these interviews and I'm listening to what the roommates are telling me, he was a rock-solid suspect at this point.
Detectives race to track down Jerry Hicker.
I went to Jerry Hicker's house in Washington, explained to him that I was looking at the Barbara Rocky case. Jerry immediately said, "You'll have to talk with my attorney," and that he wasn't going to give me a statement. So at that point, I had nothing else to do but leave.
With Jerry refusing to cooperate, investigators must find concrete evidence to link him to Barbara's murder.
We wanted to see if with today's technology, that if there was a sexual assault, that there might be something suitable for DNA testing.
I was pretty excited to find that a vaginal and rectal swab had been taken on Barbara, because by now we were utilizing DNA testing, and I thought that I was going to be able to match those up with DNA that we got from whatever suspects were in the case file.
Investigators hope that the swab test results will point toward Jerry.
They didn't know about DNA in 1974, and they packaged everything in plastic. Because it was packaged in plastic, it ruined any DNA that was in any of the biological material that was taken. I was devastated. I thought I was going to be able to solve that case really quickly, but that's not what happened.
Fearing that the case will go cold again without solid evidence, investigators gamble on another way to obtain the evidence they're looking for.
I took items that had not been tested yet from the original evidence to our crime lab to have them tested.
The original crime scene evidence includes a soil sample from beneath Barbara's body.
I was just more or less taking the dirt out to have a sample taken in case some sample fluid had migrated down into the dirt.
There was still the belief, based on the scene and everything, that there was a possibility of a sexual assault.
When I got the results of the test, surprisingly, we got a match that there was DNA from the soil that was underneath Barbara's body.
After 30 years, had DNA analysis finally identified Barbara's killer?
What came back as a result of that testing was shocking.
It's been 33 years since student Barbara Rocky was found stripped and shot in Big Cottonwood Canyon, Utah. In 2007, DNA in a soil sample from under her body finally reveals her killer.
Finding that DNA in the soil was like finding a needle in a haystack, a big haystack.
The results come in, and we've got a match, and it's Jerry Hicker.
Just that little bit of information was all that we needed to link Jerry Hicker to this crime scene. He was not who we suspected initially. And so to learn that he was the one responsible for killing her was very surprising.
On November 6th, 2007, 56-year-old Jerry Hicker is charged with the first-degree murder of Barbara Rocky.
When I first found out that the killer of Barbara was Jerry Hicker, I was surprised because I heard that he was just sort of a guy from next door.
It was a shock. Never thought it would be solved.
As prosecutors prepare for their day in court, they piece together a theory of how Jerry killed Barbara.
So, our belief of what happened was Jerry Hicker knew that Barbara may be leaving, because that next morning, and he was aware of the letter before he brought the car back.
I think what tipped him over the edge was he wanted Barbara sexually, and her rejection and her indication of leaving Jerry was more more than he could take.
Hicker winds up talking Rocky into going up Big Cottonwood Canyon with this scenic view one more time before she leaves.
And when they get to this spot, Jerry's trying to put the moves on Barbara. She doesn't want to have anything to do with Jerry that way.
Hicker takes out a gun, and in rage, he tells her to strip down, and she was probably folding the clothes in order to buy herself a little more time.
Barbara's pleading for her life. She's just trying to get anything into Jerry's mind to not do this.
And then he shot her, apparently while she was standing up. And then she went down, and then he shot her 4 times in the lower back region.
After the murder, Jerry tried to cover his tracks.
Jerry has to drive back to the campus. He gets rid of the gun, and he's trying to come up with alibis. He knows he can't park the car right there at Barbara's house, so he takes it over to the Parkway Plaza apartments, and that's where he decides he's going to use this letter making her a missing person.
This was a young woman who trusted somebody. They're supposed to be going to a nice spot, and instead she's shot and murdered.
I felt so horrible knowing that she had gone through something like that. She was probably so scared. Nobody deserved to die like that. Nobody.
I believe that Jerry was being a concerned, loving friend, and that may have put some thoughts in the investigator's mind that there's just no way Jerry could have done this.
Beneath the facade just seemed to be rage and anger that he'd been rejected.
I think Jerry Hicker was a sexual predator. They got away with a lot of crimes.
We were so glad and so grateful that the detectives had worked so hard. It boggled my mind that they could solve it after 34 years.
Despite an airtight case against Jerry, his declining health leaves prosecutors with a new dilemma.
When I went to arrest Jerry, he had been diagnosed with cancer. He was just the shell of a man. We didn't feel that his lifespan was much of 5 years, if that.
So we worked out a deal that he would plead to a substantially reduced charge of manslaughter, and that he would be sentenced to the prison for 5 years, figuring that that would be a life sentence.
Going with the plea deal was my mom's decision. She wanted him to say in his own words that he did it. She wanted those answers.
Jerry Hicker serves 3 years in Utah State Prison, and in 2014, 5 years after pleading guilty, he dies of cancer.
I bet you he had been looking over his shoulders all these years. I felt that his ill health was Barbara's justice.
This is somebody that wasted away not only his life, he ruined so many people's lives by his selfish act. Barbara didn't deserve this. She had so much ahead of her, but the family does have some answers. That's the goal in my investigation.
I think that in this case, justice was served, and that the family got answers that they would not have otherwise had.
The thing I miss most about Barbara was the times that we used to.
A woman's body is discovered in Bosham, a coastal village in Sussex, England.
When police arrived at the scene, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror.
In one of the quietest areas in the country, it was one of the most shocking murders police had ever discovered.
She'd been brutally attacked. She had been bludgeoned with a blunt instrument.
Investigators consider multiple avenues in their search for the killer.
Somebody has been murdered on their doorsteps, and they haven't found out or have any leads, any more ongoing leads as to who may have done it.
Very worrying for everyone, and everyone's sort of, looking over your shoulder the whole time.
In an attempt to weed out the killer, the police organised a massive DNA collection programme throughout the village.
People would have been so shocked and horrified and eager to help that they were more than willing to give their DNA as part of this process.
You can't force somebody to give DNA. In this case, it's like the whole village wanted to turn up.
on the southern coast of England in West Sussex, located about 3 miles south of Chichester and 5 miles from the English Channel.
Bosham is a village off the West Sussex coast. It's the kind of place where it gets a lot of tourists in the summer with this beautiful weather. A lot of people from London own second homes there. It's pretty much a place where there's a lot of money about.
The beauty of Bosham is the fact that nothing ever happens there. It's quiet. Everybody knows each other's business. Some people might not like that, but when you're in a tiny fishing village, and I say fishing because most people have a fishing boat or boat of some sort. Yes, it's known to be the place where a lot of people from London might have their second home, but it's never really got so big that you want to call it a town. It's virtually a hamlet, right, even rather than a village. But yes, it's idyllic. People want to live there. It's known for being so friendly. Nothing happens there.
The centre of the village is really the sailing, people making the most of being on the sea there.
Well, it's a quintessential English village, really. Not much really happens day-to-day basis, especially in the winter. Summer gets very busy, just tourists, etc. But yeah, no, it's a beautiful spot. A lot of visitors with the view, with the water. It's a beautiful place to live.
The people that reside in the village are typically affluent people, but it's just a nice, peaceful village that everybody seems to know everybody.
The village of Bosham is regarded as one of the safest areas in the UK, with its peaceful atmosphere and tight-knit community.
Bosham has extremely low rates of crime. In fact, at one stage, 6 months went by without a single crime being recorded. So, crime is a very rare thing in Bosham.
It's the kind of place where crime literally doesn't happen. It can go months on end with no crime being reported at all, let alone murders, any crime.
We get the odd incident, the co-op occasionally will get broken into, but normally it would be nothing more than a bike getting nicked or some sort of low-level kids mucking around. So yeah, really it's a relatively crime-free area.
No one's ever known of a car being stolen. It is a place where people want to go and visit.
But the peace of the quiet village is shattered just days after Christmas in 2013.
It was shortly before 10 a.m. on the morning of the 30th of December 2013 when Chichester police got a phone call to say that a woman had been found dead in her bed. It was apparent this woman had suffered some horrific injuries. That woman was Valerie Graves. When police arrived at the scene, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. This poor woman was found in her bed. She had been bludgeoned with a blunt instrument, basically. And police straight away started a murder investigation.
Investigators begin their murder inquiry by looking into the personal life of the victim.
Valerie Graves was originally from London. She got married to a man called Roy, who she met at a local pub. He was playing in a rock band, and Roy would later comment that Valerie never lost her childlike innocence, her childlike love of the world and of people.
She had 2 children, Tim and Jemima, who didn't live in the village but lived in London.
She was very much loved, very well thought of and very popular, and by all accounts a very nice person. She had went to Scotland where she undertook a degree in textiles and design at the Harriet Watt University in Edinburgh. She studied that in 2007. She lived in the Jedburgh area of Scotland, and after 10 years living in that town, she then made her way down south back to England to help care for her elderly mother. After her university experience, she opened a craft studio in Jedburgh where she was working as an artist.
Valerie was a mother, a grandmother, and close to her family.
Night of the 29th of December, so a few days after Valerie's birthday, around 10 o'clock at night, the family all went to bed, and Valerie was staying on the ground floor whereas the rest of the family were upstairs. On the following morning, on the 30th of December, Valerie's sister and her partner came down. Nigel went to the shops, and Jan noticed that the door to Valerie's bedroom was open. And she didn't really think an awful lot of it because she thought that maybe Valerie had gone to look after her mum and just forgotten to close it. And what she discovered was that Valerie had been attacked.
When the sister went in, and she actually went into the room and called out, she just actually couldn't work out why Valerie wasn't responding to her calling her name, saw her legs out of the duvet, felt her and realised she was actually very, very cold, straight away thought something's happened here, and then made the horrific discovery.
She'd been brutally attacked, and she could see that by the amount of blood that was around Valerie's face and head. So she immediately called 999.
They couldn't actually work out how many times she'd actually been hit around the head. But again, with this scene, what's unusual is because there would have been a lot of blood, but there was no blood outside the bedroom. So it wasn't like the sister or the brother had come down and seen blood trails or anything outside. There was absolutely nothing to be seen. Everything was contained within the bedroom.
So they would have had to have closed the crime scene down and very tactfully got the family out of there in order that the scene could be preserved, that a cordon officer could be put on the front, and nobody allowed into that premises unless they had to be there. Before they even thought about moving Valerie's body, those forensic investigators, the crime scenes officers, would have to ensure that any potential evidence on her body is recovered, meaning they take swabs, they're making sure that if there is any DNA, hairs on there, whatever it could be, linking Valerie and the suspect, that can't be lost before the body's moved. That can mean that the body will be there for a number of hours, but that's the only way to do it.
In a situation like this, the police arrive, they cordon off the crime scene. They will send in the forensic investigators to gather as much forensic evidence as they can. They'll try and collect any physical evidence from the crime scene. The police will then start looking for any other exhibits that may be relevant to the murder, in this case a murder weapon. They will interview any witnesses, in this case it would be Valerie's family who were in the house at the time.
There is potential forensic evidence on the body. There would be initial visual examination of the body. In this particular case, her body was taken to the mortuary.
Valerie's body is taken for an autopsy. Detectives are hoping it will provide more details about her final moments.
A special post-mortem would now take place of Valerie's body, an examination to establish a number of things. First off, how did Valerie die? What caused her death? But they'd also be looking at questions like, what were the circumstances around it? Are there injuries on Valerie's body able to give us an indication of what may have gone on? And it was examining these injuries that the forensic pathologist was starting to build up a picture of Valerie's last moments. From looking at the injuries to her head, he was able to establish that in actual fact it was a hammer that was used to bludgeon Valerie. But what they also established is that she had defensive injuries, the sorts of injuries that you get when you put your hands up instinctively to stop the blows, be it from a hammer, from a knife or anything coming at you. And it's these injuries that they will be looking for to indicate that actually when this attack happened, Valerie was awake, she was conscious, she was trying to defend herself, which for me makes it even more chilling because you start to think about the fear that she would have gone through in those last moments.
During the post-mortem examination, it would be what they call a forensic post-mortem, and that would be not only looking for the cause of death, but also what was used to cause the death. In this particular case, the pathologist determined that the blunt trauma injuries were caused by the round head of a claw hammer. It was determined that she was killed around midnight. There would be a number of factors that they would look at. The pathologist would look at the decomposition of the body. There's certain procedures that happen to bodies which they go through after they've died. The pathologist will be able to look at these and recognise these features, and will be able to sometimes determine a time of death.
Though the post-mortem has been completed, police continue to sift through crucial clues in hopes of uncovering the truth. As the investigation deepens, the search for the killer remains in full swing. Police are investigating the murder of 55-year-old artist and grandmother Valerie Graves, whose body was discovered by her sister in a bed at an upscale property. They were house-sitting in Bosham, West Sussex, on December 30th, 2013. The investigation is now underway, and the news of the horrific murder spreads quickly in this small village, where crime is extremely rare.
A community like Bosham, like any other sort of seaside small village, knows that during the winter it is just them, and there'll be an element of people that might arrive during the summer. But during the winter time, which is very important, we're talking about December, so it's Christmas time, literally the people just there would have been the locals, the people that live there. So to hear that there's been a murder, or even somebody being assaulted, but a murder in a place like that, that's unheard of. That is a definite, it doesn't happen here, not here.
It was a particularly violent crime, but the actual sort of severity of it, at the time, we weren't aware of, just quite how bad it was, because it was dreadful. The was that it was a burglary gone wrong, or no one really knew, but it was just seemed such a extreme reaction. Everyone was sort of saying, well, if it's a burglary gone wrong, why didn't whoever it was just leg it?
You've got to sit down with the community. You've got to say, well, look, we don't believe you're in any danger. We don't believe you've got a serial killer out here. They're going to have this belief. It's going to be very hard for some people to even to sleep at night. It's going to be very hard for them to actually go back to their normal life, because they've gone from having no police cars ever visiting them about a local bobby who might say good morning to you, to actually having the scenes of crime with all these police cars, everything's happening. And then everybody leaves. But they're left there. Somebody has been murdered on their doorsteps, and they haven't found out or have any leads, any more ongoing leads as to who may have done it.
The police initially would have looked at a number of different theories as to what happened. They're trying to build up as big a picture as possible. They were aware that Valerie was there with her family. They had to keep an open mind. They had to think, was there an argument between Valerie and a member of her family the night before? Did things get out of hand, resulting in Valerie's death?
Having completed the post-mortem and learning of the violent nature in which Valerie was killed, police discover something that they feel may be a serious breakthrough in the case.
Well, days after the murder, the police got their first lucky break, and it was a search that took place around 600 metres away from the property. They found a red claw hammer, 16-inch claw hammer, and it was found in a water-filled lane which had been filled with water due to the recent flooding.
And after 600 metres of inch by inch, hands and knees, searching the areas that the killer may have fled, they found a hammer. A hammer was in an indentation to the side of the road, submerged in some water.
Each day that passes, the opportunity to get forensic evidence diminishes. However, police did have a lucky break, because when the hammer was examined, they found blood on it that belonged to Valerie Graves, and they also found a partial DNA profile that, when examined, showed that it belonged to a male.
So they were able then to obviously bag that up, send it in to be examined, and of course what was found was, one, the DNA from Valerie, so therefore they know they've now got the murder weapon, but two, they also found the DNA, but albeit what's called partial DNA, which means it can be useful, but it cannot be used in evidence. So they knew they had the murder weapon, which is something now they can start on.
One of the theories behind the murder was that this was in fact a burglary that had gone wrong, and that Valerie unwittingly had disturbed a burglar within the premises. And which was particularly unusual in this case is that If we look at that theory, the burglar didn't actually take any property from the premises.
The police didn't come up with an awful lot of information going door to door. A lot of people didn't see or hear anything, and a lot of people didn't have a lot of information about their neighbours. They were described as people who just kept themselves to themselves, quite a private people. So the police didn't get a lot of useful information from that exercise. The police initially obviously would have kept an open mind, and they would have been speaking to Valerie's family members who were in the house at that time. And it became apparent to the police that there were no crocodile tears here. This was a genuinely devastated family who loved Valerie, and they were being very open and honest with their movements the night before and the morning when the murder was discovered.
They took the statements. There may have been a bit of disbelief that he didn't hear anything, but then, of course, the evidence that's in front of them, you'd believe it because, one, that sort of attack produces a lot of blood and a lot of spray blood. If anybody from that inside the house had done it, they would have taken that blood with them, which means you would have seen a trail or you'd have smelled bleach for cleaning up. There was none of this. There was at this stage absolutely no reason to disbelieve anything that her sister's partner or her mother said.
Police also knew that Valerie Graves was not actually meant to be there, that she was only house sitting, that she didn't own the house, and ordinarily she wouldn't have been there that night. She was house sitting as a favour to the Chamberlain family. So the police had to also consider the possibility, were the Chamberlain family the targets of this murderous attack? Police did look into the Chamberlain family and spoke to them, and they were obviously able to assert that they were in Costa Rica, where they were meant to be at the time of the murder. And in speaking to them, they didn't find anything that stood out as to why they themselves would be targeted. A local reporter, however, did discover that Malcolm Chamberlain had potentially used the house as something to feature on a swingers website, that it was a place that sex parties could be held and things like that. Police were considering, was the killer someone who had been to the property at one of these sex parties and had cased the joint out and then returned at a later date.
Strangers or other people may be aware of that property. So you're starting to eliminate individuals, and that will also speed up the possibility of discovering who actually committed the crime.
In a murder inquiry, once a suspect has been identified, it's a big decision to then go ahead and arrest them for murder and take them into custody. Police are very aware that the local communities will talk about this, and sometimes people can be convicted in people's minds before this investigation has completed its course and gone to trial.
It was very, very, very worrying for everyone, and everyone sort of, you're sort of looking over your shoulder the whole time, wondering who it might have been, and everyone was chatting and saying, oh, with this, that, and the other. Could be this, could be that, and there's rumours everywhere.
In January 2014, police arrested a local man, Daniel Pereira, and they questioned him for 3 days and then released him, and he was exonerated. He lived nearby to the crime scene, and he was a local manual labourer.
Daniel Pereira is arrested, as it was assumed that given his profession, he could have owned the claw hammer. He is released when investigators confirm the only evidence they have against him is circumstantial, but the accusation leaves both personal and public scars.
Without a doubt, he was exonerated, and then, of course, suffered the trauma of years after that, going through all this, in many ways, hatred, because people still believe no smoke without fire.
Daniel said that this arrest had destroyed his life. Basically, he said he lost his job, he lost his home, he was frightened of people trying to harm him because he was under suspicion, and he later was admitted to a psychiatric ward. Police decided to do a mass DNA screening, starting from the local area of Bossum itself and then expanding to the surrounding areas. They encouraged local people to come forward and local men 17 plus. That resulted in over 2,000 people coming forward. People would have been so shocked and horrified and eager to help that they were more than willing to give their DNA as part of this process.
Many murders have been solved as a result of screening, but this is voluntary. You can't force somebody to give DNA. In this case, it's like the whole village wanted to turn up, and the surrounding area. And of course, we always work on the adage, if you've got nothing to hide, you won't mind giving your DNA.
Despite extensive efforts of police, including the mass DNA screening of men from the local areas, and 9,500 people interviewed in relation to the murder, investigators seem to be at a dead end.
At this stage, the inquiry becomes exhausted. They've looked at all the lines of inquiries and they've got no real leads at this stage. But the family, being a close-knit family, want to still keep this in the public's eye and would, on the anniversary of her death, post leaflets around the village and try to get as much media attention as they possibly could.
Well, the case had gone cold, but police had went on the Crime Watch UK television programme to have a major appeal and a reconstruction. Her family, on the 1-year anniversary, they put posters out and about, they made more appeals through the media to get people talking again. Her family did go to great efforts to ensure that this case did not just go stone cold. They wanted to keep Valerie's name out there, they wanted people to talk about it.
In September 2018, the murder investigation team receive some luck. They receive a telephone call.
You'll always say in any investigation you need a bit of luck. And that can be a witness, that can be a bit of DNA, that can be a fingerprint, that could be absolutely anything. And in this case, in many ways it wasn't luck. It's because it was wow. It was like a wow factor. Has this really occurred?
In September 2018, they received an email from a woman in Romania, and she told the police that she was pretty convinced that her husband had carried out the murder of Valerie Graves.
Has this really occurred? Have we really got somebody contacting us to say, my husband is a murderer? That doesn't happen. Especially when you consider, as I said, it was the wife of the individual, Christian Sabu, and who's contacted the police.
Could Christian Sabu have actually been the person that killed Valerie?
The investigation into Valerie Graves' murder has gone cold for 5 years. But suddenly, detectives receive a lead from a woman living thousands of miles away in Romania, who believes her husband is guilty of the crime. Could this be a hoax? A mistake? Or has she been living with a killer this whole time? In 2018, Sussex Police reopened the investigation into the 2013 murder of 55-year-old artist Valerie Graves, who died by blunt force trauma at the hands of an intruder at a property she was house-sitting in Bosham, a coastal village near Chichester. The gruesome discovery was made by her sister on December 30th, 2013, but despite investigators' best efforts, the case went cold. Now, 5 years later, police receive a tip from a woman in Romania who suspects her husband, Christian Sabu, may be the killer.
Inquiries are made into Sabu, and it's established that he did live in the UK, just outside Chichester. Lived in a mobile caravan together with his wife.
Christian Sabu was a handyman, living in a caravan on a construction site, doing some odd jobs, probably missed home a bit, probably wasn't the life that they wanted. However, what we do know is that also they were short of money at the time.
He earned his living by doing odd jobs around the village, and in fact it was established that he had been inside the Chamberlain house house, the murder scene, and conducted certain works within the premises.
Well, what was he doing at this time? What they were able to establish that, yes, he was living in the Bossum area, not actually that far from the scene of the crime.
Christian Sabu's wife became concerned when she found alarming searches on his internet history and decided to confront him about it.
She realised that a number of weeks after the murder, they left the area and they eventually went back to Romania. They had a family and they lived a pretty normal life. But she realised that he was continuously going on his computer and using Google search to look up the murder of Valerie Graves. She was wondering why he was so interested in this particular murder. And obviously she was aware of it because they had lived not far from where it happened, when it happened. She then noticed that he looked at a photograph as part of the articles. The photograph was of the murder weapon, the red claw hammer. And she recognised the hammer. She knew that he had such a hammer. And she asked him, "Didn't you have a hammer like that?" And he got quite agitated and quite defensive. But eventually, he confessed to her what he had done and that he had killed Valerie Graves.
Now, there is belief that the marriage wasn't harmonious, but of course he had no previous convictions, 2 children, family life, but of course this wife has stood up and said, hang on a minute, and she's made the call to the police to say, I believe my husband is responsible for the murder of Valerie Graves.
He told her that he didn't mean to hurt her. He had money difficulties and he had been led to believe that at this period of time the house would be empty, that the owners were going abroad, and his plan was to travel to the property, to break in and to go to the safe to get some money out and any other valuables that he could lift and bring back to the caravan with him.
If you're breaking into a house, immediately you know you're going to be in some kind of emotional state. Your adrenaline's going to be going. You're scared, you're frightened, you're nervous. He goes in there in this emotional state to some level or other. He goes in expecting it to be empty, but then he sees Valerie. And I can picture the panic. I can picture the emotion.
On the night of the murder, he had been consuming alcohol, and he went and got on his bicycle and cycled from the caravan site on the A27 to Smuggler's Lane in Bossum.
My belief is the claw hammer was used to gain entry. So he's gone around the back of the house and shock, there's somebody here, because it goes into the bedroom. He may not have known, if he hadn't been in the house before, that was the bedroom, and he saw Valerie.
He would have left the house after his ferocious attack on Valerie. He would have threw the hammer into the watery lane, hoping that it would stay underwater and not be found. He cycled obviously back to the caravan and would have acted like everything was okay, that nothing was out of the ordinary. But a number of weeks later, with the investigation in full flow, he and his wife fled the area.
Since there was no direct evidence linking Sabu to the murder of Valerie Graves back in 2013, the family's relocation to Romania shortly after the crime did not raise suspicion. But now, after his wife's admission, investigators must gather forensic evidence to connect him to the crime.
To actually be able to have him arrested, you need a European arrest warrant. However much they want to believe the wife saying that my husband did that isn't enough, they've got to do something else. Now you've got another wow factor comes into this. This isn't luck, this is incredible. The fact that they know they've got this partial DNA which they've kept. They cannot request his, he can say no to it. So they turn around to Mrs. Sabu and say, look, we need some assistance here, we totally accept what you say, but to be able to act on it and to be able to give him perhaps the help that he needs, then I think we need some DNA.
The information that Sabu's wife was giving the police in the UK, if he was here, would have been enough for them to arrest him. But the fact he was in Romania meant that wasn't possible. They could get a European arrest warrant, but in order to do that, the evidence that you present to court has to be enough that they could be charged. The evidence is strong enough that they can go straight to trial. And they weren't at that stage. Yes, they had the admission to the wife, and the wife could have given them some information, but they needed more. They needed more evidence to link Sabu to Valerie's murder.
When they did inquiries with the Romanian authorities, his DNA wasn't on their database, so they needed to obtain a sample of the DNA. And so, with consent of the wife, they obtained DNA from the two children.
Familial DNA is when a DNA sample that belongs to a relative or a loved one of the offender or the suspect is connected to the crime scene. In this instance, the police, when they got the samples of Christian Sabu's children and compared those samples with the partial DNA sample they took from the hammer, they saw enough similarities in the two DNA profiles to know that there is some evidential link here between Sabu's DNA and the DNA found on the hammer.
Scientists were able to say, yes, this partial match is a relation of those two children, meaning that combined with the evidence that was given to them from the wife was enough for them to be able to go to the Crown Prosecution Service and say, we have enough evidence to charge. They say yes, they can then go to the court, get a European arrest warrant and get him extradited back to the UK.
July 10th, 2019, Sabu is arrested in his home in Romania. He is very cooperative. He doesn't kick up a fuss. He doesn't deny anything. In fact, if anything, he is believed to have said on his arrest, his initial arrest, I didn't mean to hurt her. And he is then extradited to the United Kingdom and questioned by British detectives.
Sabu may have told Romanian police upon his arrest that he killed Valerie Graves, but didn't intend to hurt her. But now, on British soil, it is time for him to confess what really happened that night and face the victim's family in court. In July 2019, Cristian Sabu was extradited from Romania back to England to face charges for 2013 murder of 55-year-old Valerie Graves, who had been brutally beaten to death with a claw hammer while house-sitting in Bosham, West Sussex, in December 2013. The investigation took a critical turn when Sabu's wife contacted police after discovering incriminating evidence in his internet search history. Investigators then matched Sabu's DNA to the sample recovered from the crime scene. Now in custody in the UK, it is time for questioning.
After 9 days in custody in Romania, Sabu was extradited back to the UK. And it's here he's charged with Valerie's murder, and he's now going to either have to stand trial or plead guilty.
Valerie Graves' surviving family members, who were with her the night of the murder, are present in the courtroom.
He stands up in court and tells his version of events. He maintains that he didn't mean to hurt her. He said that he was startled when he discovered she was there. He said he had been drinking alcohol, and he said he had money troubles, and his intention was purely to burgle the property.
On the 11th of November 2019, at Chichester Crown Court, Sabu pleaded guilty to the murder of Valerie Graves. In his summing up, the judge described Sabu's actions in that it was his greed that led to him being in that house, and it was his lack of conscience that led to him murdering Valerie in that way. In the UK, there's only one sentence for a conviction of murder, and that's life imprisonment. But in UK, life generally doesn't mean life. The minimum tariff will be set by the judge. And on this occasion, Sabu was given a minimum term of 24 years.
In November 2019, Judge Christine lying delivered the final verdict. The sentencing is an emotional moment for the family of Valerie Graves, who, in the wake of her death, had to endure years without answers as to who killed their loved one and why.
He was described as someone that was very quiet. Obviously, he was being translated when he was being spoken to by detectives and meeting with his defence team in England, but even his translators were saying this is quite a quiet, calm, cool man, a very normal individual. There was nothing out of the ordinary with him, and yet he did such an extraordinary, evil thing.
He goes to courts. He goes from Brighton Magistrates Court to Lewes Crown Court, where he's pleaded guilty, and he is sentenced to life and to serve a minimum of 23 years. Now that means he's going to be in his mid-50s when he's out. Now that, to me, is no age. Should he stay for longer? Should he actually do life? Well, that will be debated by many, many people, but I think in this case, had he not pleaded to murder, I think he possibly would have been found guilty of manslaughter rather than murder. That's my own opinion. But when you consider that I think the hammer was taken to actually not be used as a weapon but to gain entry, and the fact that I think had he been assessed, there would have been an element of not really remembering what he'd actually done.
The family were obviously relieved that Valerie's killer had caught, but I think they were in great sorrow that they had lost a much loved mother, sister and grandmother. And Valerie's mother sadly never got to see the day her killer was convicted in court.
Although Valerie Graves' murder has finally been solved, the case has had a lasting impact on the tight-knit community of Bosham.
When somebody's sentenced for murder, what will usually happen is a victim impact statement will be read out from friends, from loved ones, from the family of the victim to describe that exact thing, the impact that it's had on them. What Valerie's family describe is the turmoil, the pain they'd been through for those 5 or 6 years leading up to the conviction, and the fact that they'd had their mother, their grandmother, one of the anchors in their life taken away from them, and their life that's just been snuffed out by this man.
Valerie Graves was in the wrong place at the wrong time. That is so sad. And then for the police to be able to say, right, where are we with this? Is it the family? Is it someone from the village? Is it a stranger? Is it a burglar? There was so much, but they didn't have the evidence at that stage. It's quite ironic for Bosham, as the little village it is. It's known for the beauty, the idyllic place that it is, that you can go to retire, you can go for a second home, and you will enjoy your life in Bosham to the extent you don't need to lock your front door, because that was the safety that you had. It was the safety of numbers in the sense of the village people. You know each other, wonderful place to live. The only crime aspect was known from TV shows like Midsummer Murders or Poirot. Now, unfortunately, there will always be that, or for locals especially, but other people who know Bosham, that it was known for this horrendous, violent murder that took place in a wonderful, beautiful house in a beautiful little village.
Even the most beautiful places that are full of light and tranquility and peace, unfortunately those places have that dark chapter of their history. And unfortunately with Bosham, the murder of Valerie Graves will be forever associated with it and will forever be part of its dark history.
As an experienced murder investigator, when I look at the work that had been carried out by Sussex police in convicting Sabu, I understand just how much they went through. The mass screening would have created a huge amount of work. The searching that went on in order to find the hammer, the amount of investigation that they did, I just take my hat off to them, because it was an outstanding investigation.
As we know, her mother unfortunately was unable to know the outcome of this. She passed away, and you grieve. Grief never disappears. There is an element of closure, because the 4 or 5 years in between before they actually came to understanding what had actually happened, you don't know. You want an answer. Everybody wants an answer of some sort, so they got an answer. That doesn't mean that grief disappears, because you still have lost a loved one. But they're able to get some sort of closure on the fact that they know what happened. In many ways, why it happened and who did it. But that closure will not mean closure from grief.
South Carolina, police are alerted to an abandoned car in a field.
There's not a lot of information. They simply said they were reporting a car that had been there overnight.
The windows on the vehicle appeared to be black and soot-covered.
Is there anybody alive or dead in that car? Has someone been trying to get rid of evidence? If so, why?
The car is empty. A license plate search finds the owner lives 12 miles away.
They got no response at the front door. As the officer walks into the backyard, there were 2 male victims in there, both with gunshot wounds to their head.
There are a range of emotions that may drive an offence like this. Greed, revenge, anger.
It's really important that CSI teams get to that scene as soon as possible.
You need to tell us what you know. Who was it?
We need to find out who they are.
What you know is monumental to this case.
We need to catch that killer at that crime scene.
County's a pretty diverse area. You have beautiful stretch of beach along one end of it with a lot of high-end homes. And as you move inland, some areas are extremely desolate and not very well populated, very quiet neighborhoods. When something major happens in the inland areas, it's always a bit of a shock to everybody.
In a remote community on the outskirts of Conway in South Carolina, an officer secures the scene of the shooting.
At that point, he had no way of knowing when they had been killed, by whom they had been killed, where the killer or killers were, that no one was laying in wait for them.
Finding no one else at the property, CSI scope out the scene. The gunshot victims are identified as the homeowner and his 25-year-old son, Robert and Robbie Ford.
The older victim, Robert, is on the ground at the back of the house with a close contact gunshot wound under his chin. The younger, Robbie, is found off to the side of the driveway. He has a gunshot wound to the back of his head and a gunshot wound to the upper right shoulder. The doors to the residence were locked, so neither victim had gone into the house yet. Robbie appeared to be trying to flee. His cell phone was found next to his body, and the pocket that it was in had been pulled out of his shorts as if he was frantically trying to get his phone out to call for help.
To shoot someone from close range who is already shot and debilitated on the ground really is cold.
As well as the family car, Robert and Robbie's wallets have been taken from their pockets.
One of the first things we wanted to check, did someone go into the home? Was this a burglary gone bad? Because there really were no other leads. Not quite a year before the murders, there had been a burglary reported at Robert's home. One of the things that had been reported stolen was a .38 caliber revolver. It's just one of those things that's sort of interesting and makes you go, is this some sort of pattern? But some of the things sort of counted against that was that it did not appear that their home had been entered.
It appears both victims were returning home when someone came upon them. This is clearly an ambush type of situation.
The killer had maybe been observing or stalking the victims, so they were prepared in terms of what they were intending to do and how they were intending to do it.
Their deaths sent shockwaves across the neighborhood.
Robert and Robbie were long-term members of that community. Good Southern people who lived here their whole lives. They were well-liked by their neighbors.
From everyone who I have spoken to, Robert was a devoutly religious man. He was extremely involved in his church. He taught Sunday school along with his late wife. He was the choir director. He sang in the men's choir and in the quartet. Just a very well-respected member of the community. Robbie Ford was a devoted son and was a hard-working student working towards an architecture degree. He played an active role as a caregiver for his mother in the final days of her life. There was really no reason for someone to commit this horrific crime.
CSIs suspect the men were killed several hours ago.
Time is of the essence, and that is whether the crime has just happened or it's 10 or 12 hours old. There's still a lot of evidence that can be recovered in the first few hours of examinations that you don't want to lose. The longer the body's been there, the more critical the golden hour becomes. So immediately, my first thought would be to see if you can find the bullet casings. If you find the bullet casings, it will give you an indication as to where potentially the shots were fired from, and also how many shots were fired.
One of the things that stands out is that there are no fired shell casings. Now, with the two types of handguns, you have a revolver where that fired cartridge casing stays in the gun. Then the other type of handgun you have is a semi-automatic where that shell casing is ejected from the firearm. Therefore, it would be at the scene unless someone picked it up. So immediately we need to start thinking, is this a revolver or is this someone who was so forensically aware that they picked up the shell casings?
Finding no trace of the shooter anywhere, it appears they have covered their tracks.
This is an offence that has been premeditated, organised, thought out. The killer's approach is ruthless and brutal.
It was a targeted attack. The killer meant business.
That's leading us in a totally different direction now. This perhaps may be somebody who is intimately related to the victims and was looking to seek revenge.
But with the motive unclear, the team needs a forensic breakthrough to lead them to the shooter.
There is such urgency. There is a killer on the loose. We are doing everything we can to track that killer down. We have no eyewitnesses, so we are relying on the evidence that is recovered at the scene to tell us the story of what happened.
CSIs expand the search into the land around the Ford's home.
We came across a hunting camera. If it's captured the images that we're hoping it's captured, then we may have an identity on our offender. That camera is our most critical piece of evidence. What it may have documented would tell the entire story here.
In South Carolina, police are investigating a brutal double murder after finding popular father and son Robert and Robbie Ford shot dead on their doorstep.
This has raised concerns to a lot of citizens. Who do we have on the loose here? Could it happen on my street, in my house? So we've got to come up with an answer on this as quickly as we can.
The killer appears forensically aware, but they may have missed a key detail. A wildlife camera has been recovered from the scene and sent for analysis.
Based on the placement of the camera, it should have captured images of the offender attacking Robert.
That would be a priority examination by the technical teams, the digital team, to see what information's on that camera.
It was determined that the camera had no power to it. The pictures that it had captured were from a year earlier. It was a huge blow to us.
The crime scene points to Robert and Robbie being deliberately targeted. The autopsy confirms they were shot at point-blank range with the same .38 caliber firearm. In search of a motive, the team looks deeper into their lives.
You know, based on my years of experience and the lack of reasoning behind the murder of these two, my thinking from the beginning was that a family member may be involved. Because there's no reason for these two to be dead.
Detectives find 59-year-old Robert was a devoted dad, grandfather, and brother.
Robert Ford was very frugal and really worked his whole life to be able to provide for his children.
Robert has 2 children, Robbie and Samantha.
Samantha Ford Rabin, Robert's daughter from a previous marriage, spent much of her time with her mother but would visit her father often on the weekends. He and his first wife were divorced fairly early on, and then Robert remarried and married Robbie's mother, and they were married for 26 years before she died. Robbie and Samantha were in constant communication. By all accounts, the family was very close. They would spend holidays together. They would often bring meals to each other.
Still no closer to identifying who wanted Robert and Robbie dead, the team needs a forensic breakthrough. Detectives request the men's phone data and begin to track their last known movements, while CSIs turn their attention to the stolen car.
We certainly believed that whoever drove that car was the person who had killed Robert and Robbie.
Whoever would have driven the vehicle there may have left fingerprints, DNA. After searching in over a 200-foot radius around the vehicle and finding nothing, as I approach the vehicle closer, there are cigarette butts on the ground just outside the driver's door. If the car was parked on a roadway, the cigarette butts may not be relevant at all. But in this particular case, there's 3 of them just outside the driver's door of this vehicle.
The cigarettes are sent for forensic testing.
Cigarette butts are an incredibly good source of DNA evidence. The DNA is actually on the outside because that surface is in contact with the smoker's lips. It's not actually the filter itself, which is contaminated with nicotine. The skin cells from your lips are actually transferred onto the end of the cigarette butt. This is where the DNA is going to be.
Taking a closer look at the Ford's car, CSIs are concerned any further evidence may be lost.
Once I opened the vehicle up, I could smell some type of a flammable liquid. I'm seeing charring on the steering wheel, the driver's seat, the console in the vehicle.
Initially, the thought that the car had suffered so much fire damage was thought to be a setback, but as we are looking more at the scene, we realize that the car was not completely engulfed in flames.
By closing the doors and windows, the oxygen in the vehicle was consumed by the fire and actually smothered itself. Inside the vehicle, a ski cap and sweatpants were found. Although they had smoke and a little bit of fire damage, they may hold a DNA profile. So this was not a rocket scientist, doing this crime.
On one hand, the killer was well planned and organised, but as they come to dispense of the evidence, it seems that they maybe experienced a moment of panic.
The car is sent off to be examined further in a controlled environment. Using CCTV and phone data, detectives have pieced together Robert and Robbie's final hours.
Robert and Robbie were looking for an apartment in the Charleston area for Robbie, who was going to be studying there the next semester. So they had traveled down there, looked at a few apartments, and then stopped for dinner on the way home.
While at the restaurant, Samantha messages Robbie. This is the last time anyone was in contact with the men. At 9:15, their neighbor hears gunshots.
There are quite a few lawfully possessed guns in Horry County, so it's not unusual to hear gunshots. But what was different in this case was that it was a number of gunshots interrupted by a scream.
10 minutes later, Robert's car is caught on camera.
We had surveillance video from a nearby business showing the car being driven past. That was on the route that would have been traveled from the scene of the murder to where the car was found. And that was very helpful in establishing the timeline of that night.
Now able to pinpoint when Robert and Robbie were killed, the team confirms alibis for all relatives. The evidence recovered from the car is the last remaining lead. cigarettes and the ski cap return the same male DNA profile. It's run through the police database, CODIS.
Unfortunately, in this case, CODIS did not give us a hit. That means that the killer had never been put in the system before. It was a real blow to our investigation.
This case is going to go cold if we don't come up with something new.
We had to start thinking outside of the box, and the Horry County Police Department decided to look into forensic genealogy. This was really an innovative step.
Forensic genetic genealogy is basically the use of genetic genealogy databases to assist in the identification of a potential suspect. Lots of us do genealogy tests because it's interesting. A lot of us want to know how much DNA do we share, can we find a third or fourth cousin, and people are actively choosing to send their samples because they want to find distant relatives.
By identifying genetic matches between people in these databases and the crime scene DNA, the team is hoping to narrow down the search for the shooter to one particular family.
We take small fragments of DNA and we look at how many of those fragments of DNA you share with other people. And then you've got a possible family connection for who that DNA profile belongs to.
Although not foolproof, it's possible for forensic genetic genealogists to locate a third cousin or closer in 90% of Americans. The male DNA from the Ford's abandoned car is sent for analysis, but the team must be patient.
A forensic genetic genealogy investigation is as long as a piece of string, basically, because there's a lot of computer algorithms involved in looking at relatives, so it could be in excess of 6 months to do just one case.
As the months pass, the pressure builds.
Robert's two sisters were really going after the investigators. What have you found? Do you have any leads? Law enforcement and prosecutors are waiting and waiting and waiting to get back results that could really make or break a case.
A year later, they find out if it's been worth the wait.
They're able to give us the names of 3 brothers. 2 of those brothers were already in the CODIS system, so investigators were able to rule them out, leaving us with that one remaining brother, Randy Granger.
At the time of the murders, Granger was living close to the scene of the Ford's abandoned car.
Granger did have a criminal history for kidnapping and robbery. He had actually spent 15 years in the prison system, but he was released just prior to the passage of the act that allowed the collection of DNA for this database that we now know as CODIS. And so he sort of just missed that cutoff.
Granger has a military background. Here is somebody who has been trained to survive under combat and follow orders. Somebody who is familiar with using a gun and able to kill at close range.
But to secure a warrant for Granger's arrest, the team still needs a direct DNA sample, as forensic genetic genealogy is not always admissible in court due to concerns over quality.
Forensic genealogy is kind of used for intelligence purposes. It gives you an indication as to who it might be, but then you need to confirm that.
Determined not to let Granger slip from their grasp, he's put under surveillance and his phone data is investigated.
When we are using cell tower data, what we try to do is identify 3 locations of interest. In this case, they identified the scene where the car was abandoned, the murder scene, and Samantha's home because she was the last person we knew who had contacted the victims. He actually turned his phone off at the murder scene, but we were able to squarely place him at the scene of the abandoned car.
At 10:15, Granger calls his girlfriend, Teresa Martin.
At the time of the murders, they were living together. We had him pinging at the car scene because he had to call Teresa to pick him up.
You have right to remain silent. Anything you say can be engaged in court of law.
Randy Granger and Teresa Martin are brought in for questioning.
All right, well, thank you for coming here this morning.
You will.
We want to talk to you about a couple of things.
I'm nervous.
Don't be nervous. It's okay. We just got some questions.
Okay.
Okay.
We're very confident that we have two of the right people with Granger and Martin. We have the genealogical DNA match, as well as the tower data. But if you look at it, it just didn't make sense. Granger and Martin didn't have any obvious motives.
It makes this look like a planned hit.
What do you know about anything that Randy has been involved in while you guys were dating?
Nothing. Because I had time getting the rascal out of bed. He's not no bad person. He don't drink, he don't do drugs. He's just lazy.
So you never known Randy to be any, like, kind of violent,
No,
nothing
sir.
like that?
I've never known him to be in any kind of trouble.
We knew that there was someone else involved, and in order to get to that person, we had to have either Martin or Granger talk.
Exactly 2 years on from the brutal murders of Robert and Robbie Ford, investigators believe they're on the verge of a breakthrough.
When you're ready. Do you mind? Yeah, come sit right here.
Evidence points to Randy Granger as the shooter, helped by his former girlfriend, Teresa Martin.
Looking at just the two of them, Granger and Martin didn't have any obvious motives. We knew that there had to be someone else in play. The goal was to try and get to the person behind the murders. What we came to learn was that Teresa Martin was kind of loosely related to Robert's daughter, Samantha Rabin.
Samantha?
Yes, sir.
How well do you know Samantha?
She's a good girl. She, don't bother nobody either. And she's got them 3 kids she has to take care of.
Teresa lived next door to Samantha's mother, and had spent quite a deal of time with members of Samantha's family.
As far as I know, she loved her daddy. Because she could, she posted on Facebook about his birthday and stuff, and that she loved him and stuff, which I know she loved her daddy. I mean, anybody's got a daddy gonna love him. But other than that, that's all I can tell you right now.
Martin engaged in what I call progressive truth-telling. She would give little bits of the story, but the detectives were very good about leaving her alone for a little bit, coming back into the room and confronting her with evidence that we did have.
Investigators ask her about the Ford's car.
So down the street from yours, there was a car fire. And at that car fire, we knew Randy was there.
Oh, no, I don't know.
But you picked him up from it.
No, I did not.
It's starting to worry her. And then slowly, by using the rapport that they've built with her, they are starting to get the information.
I'm not saying you know about it, but we know that you were right there where the car fire was, and Randy.
Well, I don't know nothing about the fire, but I did pick him up down the road, but it was way down the road.
Talk to me about that.
He called me. He said it's raining, come and pick me up. And he never mentioned about nothing. Honest to God, on my dead dad's grave, he never said anything to me about nothing.
But you're not telling us 100% truth. Obviously, we got your cell phone records, and we got text messages.
Tell us what you know, please.
Will I get in trouble?
If you're not involved, no.
I'm not involved.
But what you know is monumental to this case.
Martin was fairly cooperative. It was clear that she wanted to be able to testify in an effort to get a better deal.
We don't want you to be in trouble at all. Let me tell you this, and I will tell you this. He's in the next room, because we're going to go talk to him. If he's going to tell us something that incriminates you, you need to tell us first to get out in front of it.
Convinced Granger is the shooter, the team still needs a direct DNA sample to confirm the results of the forensic genetic genealogy and link him to the Ford's car.
The forensic genealogy leads us to potential suspect, but the buccal swab is required to confirm it.
We have a search warrant for your DNA.
2 sets of butyl swabs from Randy Granger. Butyl swabs are a Q-tip in your mouth. Okay? Open up.
It's actually a swab from the skin cells around the mouth. It's the skin cells that would provide the full DNA profile.
As they await the results, Teresa Martin breaks under the pressure.
Now, obviously, we had detectives come to your house this morning, knock on your door, and talk to you politely about coming out. We didn't come over there kicking in doors, sending a SWAT team, arresting you, nothing like that. Because we wanted you to come here and speak to us in a calm fashion, just like we're doing, have a conversation.
We want to give you the opportunity to be honest with us.
I heard that he done it.
You heard that who done it?
Randy.
Who'd you hear it from?
Him.
You know, based on everything that they had been looking at, they had a strong feeling this was their man. It was just a matter of getting something to prove it.
When the results of the DNA swab come back, Granger is cornered.
The cigarette butt that was collected from the ground came back as a match to the profile developed in this case. I got your DNA off of 3 of these that were sitting right outside of this car. That matches this skull cap with DNA on it.
Some hair in it.
That matches the cigarette butt. Randy Granger was in the vehicle that day. This is a major accomplishment for us. This is good detective and forensic work coming together.
What do you think about it for a second?
Sit there, look at these.
I know it's a lot.
We'll be back in about 5 minutes.
But the team still needs to identify who recruited him.
You're not the one I want to deal with on this.
When they do leave, you can kind of see the cogs ticking in Granger's head. You can see his chest going up and down, suggesting fear, anxiety, panic.
I know you didn't do this by yourself. What I want is the person who asked you to do it. Who what? You really want a place to... I'm serious now. Because I got you right now for at least 2 counts of murder. Arson, criminal conspiracy, for something that wasn't your idea. I want the person who hired you to do it, or asked you to do it. Because that's the only way that this benefits Mr. Randy. Do you understand that? You're longer, I guess.
With Granger clamming up, police need to keep Teresa talking.
Listen, I know you're not being completely honest. So at this point, Miss Teresa has to worry about Miss Teresa. Everybody else is out the window.
We know you guys were hard up for money. We know Randy was very hard up for money. Like you said, he was lazy, didn't have a job. I think somebody gave him a job.
But see, like you said, somebody gave him a job.
Who was it? It's gonna feel good once you get it off your shoulders.
Samantha did. Okay.
Samantha had been on our radar the whole time. Robert's 2 sisters were really going after the investigators. Samantha, on the other hand, really was not interested in how the investigation was going, and I think that that's something that sort of keyed the detectives to look at her more closely.
With the focus now on Robert's daughter, Samantha, investigators still need to verify Teresa's confession.
From a forensic point of view, that's incredibly difficult to prove because if they've never been to the scene, there's no evidence at that scene that can link them back to it. Digital forensics can play a really important role when you can't physically put someone at that crime scene.
Experts find no evidence of Samantha and Granger having ever communicated. They need to find out if someone acted as the go-between.
Using the cell tower data along with phone records, investigators were able to see that in addition to being in contact with Granger, Martin had also had frequent contact that day with Samantha Raven.
On the day of the murder, cell site data shows Teresa and Samantha were in contact 24 times.
One of those communications fell in line with the timeline that we created for the murder, and that text message was from Martin to Samantha Raven saying, "I'm home alone."
Why did you send that message? You did that so she would know that he was there.
Yeah.
Did someone tell you to send her that message?
No, I said it myself.
You just did it all by yourself?
Yes, sir. I just told her I was home alone.
Okay.
You know.
But that was key phrase for
it's happening.
Okay.
After she was confronted with that text message is when she revealed the entire plot. She helped lay the groundwork. She provided the connection between Samantha Raven and Randy Granger. Teresa Martin tells us that Samantha Raven approached her and asked her to bring Randy Granger to her, that she had a job for him to do. And when Teresa Martin brings Randy Granger together with Samantha Raven, Raven asks Granger, "Will you take care of my dad and my brother? And it's got to be done this weekend."
I know this is a hard part to say, but you knew he was going to kill them people.
No, I didn't. Honest God, I did not. On my dead daddy's grave, I did not.
Did he tell you that day that he had a job?
He said that he had Samantha hired him to do a job at her daddy's house. That's all I know.
Okay, hold. Now, did he tell you that day? And then ask you to bring him over there?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I dropped him off at the road. I never pulled in the driveway.
Well, no, that's fine. I understand.
Yeah. And I lived. That's all that's across the street.
What was Randy supposed to get out of it?
Say she was supposed to pay him $20,000.
Okay.
Samantha and Randy really only had that one deadly contact when she asked him to kill her father and brother. Granger studiously avoided contact with Samantha because he knew that anyone who was in contact with her become a target for police. Folklore tells us that you always want to look at the people closest, but in my 31 years of prosecuting, this is the only case I have had where someone hired a hitman to kill their relatives. There really is some evil that you see in paying someone to kill your father and brother.
This isn't an emotional or impulsive crime. It's a means to an end. That level of detachment and callousness is really quite concerning. Why would you do that to your father and to your brother? What could be so important? That relationship meant nothing to Raybon.
Digital experts recover disturbing searches in Samantha's internet history.
Legally, we don't have to prove motive, but sometimes you have to convince the jury. Because otherwise, like, why would she kill them? You want to give them a reason why she would.
Accused of masterminding her father and brother's murders, Samantha Raybon is taken into custody.
Anything you say can't always be issued in court of law. You're the right to talk to the lawyer in prison with you on your question.
She clearly was not happy. I don't think it came as a complete surprise to her.
As you know, client's not giving a statement at this time. Don't say anything at this point. Everything in this room is recorded, okay?
She came to the police department with an attorney and declined to speak with the investigators.
The charge is murder. That during the month of August 2018, the defendant, Samantha Raven, did solicit co-defendants to murder Robert and Robbie Ford. Do you want to talk to us?
No.
Okay.
She comes across as somebody quite cold and controlled, possibly thinking that she may be able to get away with it.
Given the horrific nature of the crime, we were hoping at some point she would show some sort of remorse, try to come up with some reason to make this make sense.
Detectives pressed Teresa Martin on why Samantha plotted to kill Robbie and Robert.
Okay? Tell it. Plain and simple. Stop covering up for this murderous woman. Who's trying to drag you down a hole with her?
Samantha plotted all this so she inherited them stuff.
Hadn't she told that before?
The only thing that I've heard her say, that if something happened to her daddy and brother, she would inherit everything.
Investigators follow the money.
Before the murder, Samantha was living in a single-wide trailer that had a value of approximately $32,000. After the murders, the properties that she inherited were worth quite a bit more than that, not to mention pensions, savings accounts, so she ended up inheriting over $1 million. What we came to find out is that Robbie was the primary beneficiary to many of Robert's assets.
She wanted both of them killed before he left to go to college, because she knew if just her daddy got killed, then she would have to split everything with Robbie.
Greed can be so destructive, driven by envy, by fear, it can be driven by rage, and there are no winners here. Everybody's had a price to pay.
Granger is given 2 life sentences. Martin takes a plea deal. Both agree to testify against Samantha.
The courtroom was packed for her trial. There were staunch supporters of Samantha Raven, and there were just as many people who believed to their soul that she had done it. And there was a clear divide in the courtroom. But it's not every day that you see a man sit on a witness stand and admit to cold-bloodedly murdering 2 people. Granger said that Martin dropped him off at the Ford home and he laid in wait for them to come home. While he was waiting there, he would smoke cigarettes, but he didn't want to leave that DNA at the crime scene. So he tucked it into his shoe. When Robert and Robbie come home, he drew Robert's attention. Robert turned, he shot him in the head. Granger then went up to Robbie, put the gun against his head, and executed him. He takes the car to the field, takes off the skull cap, takes off the sweatpants that he had been wearing over his jeans, and changed shoes. And it must have been at that point that the cigarette butts fell out onto the ground, and he didn't notice it. He had gasoline and lit the car on fire, shut the door, and walked off, not knowing that the fire wouldn't completely consume the car.
That critical mistake meant that a lot of evidence was still within that vehicle. It's a common misconception that fire destroys DNA.
With so much forensic evidence putting Granger at the crime scene, Samantha's defense attacks the credibility of his witness testimony.
It's the job of the defense attorney to try and knock your testimony out from the jury. There's a lot of tensions over, is the person going to be found guilty? Is there a chance they're going to be let off?
But the prosecution has an ace up their sleeve.
One of the theories that we presented at trial related back to that whole burglary of Robert's home, not quite a year from the murders. Granger testified that Samantha told him she had taken some things from her father's home to make it look like a burglary.
Is this the gun you saw?
Yeah.
Both Granger and Martin identified the gun that was stolen as what Samantha gave Granger to use as the murder weapon, so it certainly does seem that she had been planning this for a while.
The jury retires.
That is probably the most tension you will ever feel, and people who have worked with me know that they should not talk to me. At that point, I've done as much as I can do. There was a lot of outside pressure with this one simply because the community was so invested in the trial. Robert and Robbie were very well loved in the community. And I think that added pressure that I don't feel in every trial I do.
Samantha is found guilty of Robert and Robbie's murders and sentenced to life without parole.
When the judge read the sentence, I said to my partner, did I just hear that right? Because it was just a relief at that point. It was a case that really meant a lot to me.
Without the forensic evidence in this case, it may not have been solved. Forensic evidence is what told the story of what happened and who's responsible.
Use of forensic genetic genealogy in America has been a real breakthrough for them. There's no doubt about it, because they've had now over 1,000 cases where forensic genetic genealogy has actively been involved in the case.
If you've got DNA evidence that links to an offender, it's the lead that you don't want to give up on.
Samantha Rabin, to this day, has never shown an ounce of remorse. It's certainly not unheard of for a family member to kill another family member, but what was unusual here was the real deviousness, the advanced planning that had to take place before the murders even occurred. It just really shows a coldness of heart.